Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. It is a beautiful week to be a baseball fan around here. The Orioles taking on the Washington Nationals for a couple games middle of the week. We'll be back home on Friday. Luke and I will have Maryland Lottery scratch-offs in the Pac-Man giveaway on Friday at Fadley's from 2 until 5. We'll be down there set up this weekend as the Arizona Diamondbacks come in. Hopefully, the Orioles are still in first place by the end of the week. It has been quite a week. Ravens a little bit more on downtime, which gives my man Luke Jones a little time to opine. Now, we talked a lot about the starting pitch. We talked a lot about prosperity. We talked a lot about great young players and Jackson Holiday coming and Mateo holding down the fort. A lot of good news over the weekend. And, these Oriole fans, you bring up one little nugget of anything that's not orange, rainbows, and sunshine, but the closer situation, it kind of goes away for a weekend when you win a couple of games. Nice sweep on the road. But the Kimbrel thing, it's a little bit of a whack-a-mole. It's going to keep popping up, Luke, and we did not address it because there's so much prosperity in our previous segment. But we probably should. I mean, long-term, this is probably the biggest issue they have, and you knew it was going to be that way when Batista went down last year. It's like you don't replace that with anything other than something suboptimal, and this is suboptimal.
Well, you can't view it through the lens of a one-for-one trade-off. As much as it looked that way in a tidy way that the Orioles spent, $13 million on Craig Kimbrel, and guys that high on the all-time saves list, and a guy who could be in the Hall of Fame one day, all of that, you still have to recognize where he is at this point in his career, what he is at this point in his career, in contrast to what Felix Batista was for 5 months for the Orioles last year. And as I said to you over and over throughout the offseason, even the absolute best projection as the Orioles or any team in Major League Baseball worth its salt at this point will look through data, and they'll have their projections and different outcomes for each player, with projection systems. The best possible projection for Craig Kimbrel was not going to be what Felix Bautista did for them for 5 months last year. So I think, first of all, I think we need to be realistic, fair, keep our heads about this. It's not as though Craig Kimbrel's been a disaster. I mean, this guy got off to a really good start. I mean, he blew his first save of the season, but we all remember that was a bloop, and it was a sacrifice fly. It wasn't like he got lit up. He actually pitched really, really well. Was on an absolute roll. Recently, talking the last 2.5 weeks, it's been disconcerting. It's been unsettling. It's been unnerving. Whatever adjective you want to use to describe it, it's been that as far as angst and not feeling overly confident. But I think a lot of this is needing to understand what Craig Kimbrel has been in recent years and what he's going to be for likely the remainder of his career. He has been a more up and down proposition over the last 4 or 5 years. You don't need to even dig that deeply into the numbers to see that. He's been a guy that at times has still been really good, and at times still looks like the old Craig Kimbrel, who was amazing with Atlanta and Boston and going back years ago. And we've also seen him have some seasons where the ERA was just plain ugly, and he really struggled. So I think so there's that. Two, you're talking about someone in his mid-30s. He's on he's not even the back nine of his career. He's on like the back few holes of his career, realistically speaking, at this point. So I think you have to understand what you have. And I think what the last couple of weeks to me have, if that's taught us anything, it's not for me that I'm done with Craig Kimbrel, or he can't close, or he can't do it at all, or he's an absolute terrible signing. And look, I'm not going to sit here and judge the signing one way or the other to this point. It's the first week of May. But I think what we are seeing is perhaps a cumulative impact of, he's probably not a guy that you want to be calling on back-to-back nights very often. Certainly not a guy you want to be calling on to pitch 3 out of 4 nights very often. And I think maybe we're seeing that add up a little bit. And, the Oakland series, it came to a head. He had some upper back tightness. They backed off of him for 4 days. Saw him work out a couple times in Baltimore during that Yankee series, even though he didn't appear. I think he did warm up in the finale if I remember correctly. So he was available that day. But hey, he came in on Friday night in a 3-0 save situation, and he struck out the side, and he looked good. He looked fine. He looked like Craig Kimbrel was looking earlier in the year for them. Comes back out Saturday night in a tight 2-0 game. It did not look good, and he's walking guys, and he's not throwing strikes. So I hate to make too much out of those two appearances, but I feel like at least for the time being, Brandon Hyde and the organization they're getting their answer in terms of how often can you depend on Craig Kimbrel. And I don't think it's a case where he's going to be pitching back-to-back nights very often. And I think if he does, you need to be ready, to his credit, in the way that Brandon Hyde was on Saturday night, where he saw it was going sideways. And guess what? They pulled him, and it worked out. And to be clear, I saw the Philadelphia Phillies do this with Craig Kimbrel a lot, especially down the stretch last year, where he struggled at times. And if he struggled, they did not hesitate. And I think that's where you're hoping him, as a veteran, realizing, some of the mortality of his career, but also just being a professional. And Brandon Hyde, if you're him, having the credibility with his players to be honest, where if you say, look, if this isn't going well, Craig, I love you, and that doesn't mean I'm not going to go to you in a couple nights, but I got to put someone else in there. And if you're Craig Kimbrel, you got to recognize and say, hey, if I'm not going to throw strikes, Skip's not going to leave me out there to blow the game. So, I'm not trying to be dismissive about it. I'm not trying to be too reactionary one way or the other, but I think we're seeing that, as we should have known all along, and I think everyone did know, but in the moment, that doesn't make you any less frustrated, that this isn't Felix Bautista. And navigating the final month of the season last year without Felix Bautista was one thing, when you're already in a position that, from the moment he went down, the Orioles knew that they were still going to make the playoffs, right? Even if the division wasn't sewn up at that point, they knew they were going to be in the postseason. It's a different animal when you're talking about navigating 6+ months without Felix Bautista. So it's a collective effort. Whoever they were going to bring in, whether it was Kimbrel or whether they were going to pony up the money for Josh Hader, it wasn't going to be the same exact contribution that a healthy Felix Bautista gives you. So this was always going to need to be a collaborative effort. And I think what we've seen over the last couple of weeks only reinforces that I still think Craig Kimbrel can be a big part of what they do, but I think you have to start viewing this through a different lens, in terms of, he's not just going to be the guy that you're going to hand the ball to every single night, no questions asked. I think you're going to have to look at the workload a lot more, and I think you're going to have to manage that a lot more. And that's where it becomes that much more important. And that's where, as we get deeper into the summer and closer to the trade deadline, you need more high leverage arms. You need to have 3, 4, maybe 5 guys that on any given night you feel confident in saying, okay, I might need to play the matchups a little bit. And you talked about that in our previous segment. It might be Danny Coulomb one night because 2 out of the 3 guys due up in the 9th inning are left-handed hitters. It might be Jacob Webb on a night where there's a couple right-handed hitters. I mean, Jacob Webb struck out Aaron Judge twice in that Yankees series. So it's not to say that it can't be done with, quote, lesser guys. I mean, you got to have trust in them. You're not going to throw Mike Baumann out there in a save situation. But I think we're seeing that this is going to have to be much more collaborative. And it was always going to be that way. If there's something that told me that people didn't pay attention to Craig Kimbrel the last few years, it was anyone who was assuming that you're just going to hand the ball to him for every single save situation. I never thought that was going to be the case. And I think we're seeing that play out. I think you got to be more mindful of his workload. I think you're going to have to pick your spots. And I think you need to have a backup plan in place, for lack of a better term. Now, some nights you might just be in a pickle where you're just like, okay, our bullpen's kind of shot for tonight. We can't go to Cano again because he just pitched the previous 2 nights.
Well, this is the one thing where baseball taking away the
then that's just
15-inning game, right? Like, this is where baseball, putting the guy on second base, getting these games over with, that your bullpen doesn't get annihilated in the way that it could after a long night. Not just a long night because your starter leaves the game in the 4th inning, but you wind up playing 14 or 15 innings. All that's gone. So that's a good part of being good in this era, is you're not going to have that problem, a real depleted bullpen in that way.
You're not, but at the same time, in this era, starters don't go as deep. I mean, we know that, right? I mean, that's just it's simple reality. There is not as everyone wakes up Monday morning after this sweep in Cincinnati, there is not. I'm almost positive. I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, there is not a team in Major League Baseball right now, including the Philadelphia Phillies, who have Zach Wheeler, Aaron Nola, and Ranger Suarez, who was just NL Pitcher of the Month. You know, their rotation. You'll take that top three against anyone in baseball right now. There is not a rotation. There's not a team in baseball right now that is averaging 6 innings per start. You know, they are just under that mark. The Orioles, you know, for all the talk that you'll hear, not so much this, obviously this series, they pitch really, really well, but, you know, for the talk that you'll hear, and every fan base does this. I'm not picking on Orioles fans. It's just the reality of where baseball is in 2024, for better or worse. You'll hear people say, well, they need to pitch deeper into the games. The Orioles right now are seventh in the majors in starter innings. Seventh. Their guys are pitching as deep as anyone else in baseball, really, save for Philadelphia and Seattle, and you know, if you want to throw maybe San Diego in there. I mean, that, you know, but it's really close. I mean, those other teams are only, you know, the Phillies are the only team that maybe has they've opened up a tiny bit of space, but this is the game. So to your point, yes, we don't see the extra inning marathon games that tax a bullpen in the same way, but you're rarely seeing starters go 8 innings anymore. I mean, it's kind of been the 7th inning start has almost become the new complete game. I mean, that's kind of sort of where we are at
But
this
you
day
also
and
don't
age.
see
So
one-on-one matchups
the
where
point is,
you get
you're
4
going to use your
relievers in one
bullpen
inning
arm.
either, right? Like we're not getting that either because when you come in, you have to
Correct.
pitch. So you're not
Correct.
burning up arms using 6 relievers in a game in the 7th, 8th, and 9th inning.
Yeah, but on the regular, you're using a minimum of 3. I mean, you know, you're not having very many starts where you see a starter go 8 and then the closer comes in for the 9th. I mean, you just don't see a whole lot of that anymore. And again, I'm not saying that that's good for old school fans who cringe hearing that. I'm just telling you where it is from just reality, where
Most
the game
nights,
is,
4
for
guys
better or for
pitch,
worse. I'm
right?
not saying I like
Most
it.
guys, most nights it's a
Most
starter
nights.
and 3 relievers, right? Okay.
Typically. I mean, and that's if things go relatively well, right? I mean, it's where it is right now. So the point is, with bringing it back to Craig Kimbrel, you are always going to need a couple more high leverage guys. And if there's something about this team, you know, we talked about it a little bit talking about the starters in our previous segment, but I will continue to say, yes, they absolutely are going to need another high leverage arm that you would view either as a closer or as another June 2023 Yennier Cano type guy who's just lights out unbelievable, even if he's not a 9th inning guy for whatever his current club is right now. They're going to need that. You know, now, will Jacob Webb continue to do what he's doing? I have no idea. He may not even be on the roster in 2 months. You know, same with someone like Suarez. We'll see where Tyler Wells is when he comes back, because there, you know, it doesn't look like there's a rotation spot for Tyler Wells anymore. So again, that goes back to the trickle down effect of, if you have a healthy starting rotation, a couple guys can go to the bullpen and maybe help you out there. So there's some of that, and there's still all of that's ongoing, right? I mean, the roster's a living canvas. We've talked about that, but you know, you look at the pen. That's why you're not going to have 8. I understand, like, people will complain about Mike Bauman, you know, and he was shaky on Sunday in an 11-0 game. You're not going to have 8 shutdown relievers in your bullpen. I mean, you're just not going to have that. But you better have, I'd say, 5 guys that you feel can do that for you at least sometimes, right? 5 guys that can pitch the 8th inning in a 1-run game, or the 9th inning in a 1 or 2-run game, at least sometimes, because again, Kimbrel can't do it every night. I think we're seeing, literally, even if physically he could do it, from just being effective, that's not who he is anymore. You can't have Cano pitching 4 out of 5 nights on the regular. I mean, you can't do that with Danny Coulomb. So you need, it's almost like hockey, right? I mean, where you have your shifts, you have to have some line changes available on a night to night basis, where you kind of say, all right, Cano's down tonight, or, Kimbrel's pitched 2 out of the last 4 nights. He can't go again. it's going to need to be Jacob Webb. It's going to need to be Danny Coulomb tonight. So you have to have some of that, and I think that's every team. Felix Bautista is such a unique talent, and we could even debate that. How much was his workload impacting the fact that he had an injury? Or did he just break because pitchers get hurt all the time? And there's only so much you can do when a guy's throwing 102 miles per hour. The UCL is only going to hold up so long, right? So,
well, we got guys complaining they're getting hurt because of the pitch clock, literally, right?
I mean, there's so many different variables. And look, I mean, that's such a can of worms right now. That's just so, I think, so difficult to pinpoint one variable. I think, first of all, I think this is a trend that's been going on for a very long time right now. I think if you look at some of the, whether you're talking James Andrews or some of the other, Meister is the team doctor for the Rangers, who's done some of the Orioles elbow surgeries for either major league guys or minor league guys. You hear them talk that, youth baseball, the amount of spin that guys are trying to put on the ball, all those different factors. I mean, it's an epidemic, and I don't want to hear that it's just the pitch clock. In the same way that I'm not going to dismiss that the pitch clock isn't a variable, but these things have been happening for years now, and it's trended in a bad direction for years. And, that's why you need as many pitchers as possible. I was even talking with someone about this during the last Orioles homestand, that in a strange way, and I don't mean that it's a perfect comparison because pitching is so much more valuable overall within the sport, but I almost think teams have to look at pitchers like the NFL looks at running backs, in the way that they're really valuable for the time that they're effective, but long term, it's not, generally, it doesn't feel like it's a great investment because they're going to break down. So, it's not as, it's not apples to apples because, pitching is just so much more valuable to the sport overall than any one running back to his football team. But there's just so much of that goes on so you just need a lot of depth. Anytime you think you have enough pitching, and, Mike Elias kind of joked about it last homestand, and then Grayson Rodriguez winds up on the IL just as Kyle Bradish and John Means are coming back. And look, Grayson Rodriguez presumably is going to, he's throwing again, assuming he comes back, then great. And you know what? Probably something will happen. Someone will tweak a hamstring, or someone else's arm will start hurting. It's just,
well, you hope it's not
Bradish
or Means, right? I mean, we're a week into this. We talked a little bit about this, but not at length. But boy, it's a whole ball club getting off the bus a month from now if these guys are making turns. And I don't know what it means for Suarez or Irvin or even Dean Kramer on weeks when they only play twice in 4 days, right? Like, I don't know who the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th starter is going to be, but we were trying to figure out who the 3rd and 4th starters were 2 weeks ago.
Sure. But at the same time, okay, those guys might be okay. Heaven forbid Corbin Burns starts, something's barking for him. I mean, it's just, I don't mean to be flippant about it, but you have to prepare for anything. I mean, Brandon Hyde said it during the Yankees series. He was asked kind of in general terms. I think he was asked about Bradish at that point in time because, Bradish obviously made the start in the finale. And he really just said, like, it's tough to make any assumptions. It's why you try not to be too positive with any one pitcher and his health, and you don't want to be too pessimistic. In the same way that from the moment that Mike Elias announced that Kyle Bradish was dealing with the UCL, you had fans who wanted him to get Tommy John surgery 2 weeks before that. And now we're seeing him back. And look, that doesn't mean Kyle Bradish is going to be pitching all year and fine and we'll never have elbow issues again. I mean, we just don't know. That's why you need so much depth. And anytime you think you have enough pitching, you don't. And you'll typically find out that you don't. And I think such a great example of this is look at the Rays, who a year ago at this time last year looked like they might run away with the AL East, and then go look at the number of injuries they had to their rotation. And it really was admirable that they still ended up taking the Orioles all the way to the very end of the season for the AL East title. But a year later, they're still dealing with the fallout of some of those rotation injuries where guys still aren't back. And you're seeing the Rays, this year, they've kind of realities settled in for them. Not that they're terrible, but they're clearly not playing at the same clip. And, maybe they'll catch fire at some point. I'm not going to write them off, but they've dealt with so many rotation injuries. I mean, I'll say this much. If the Orioles dealt with that many rotation injuries, we'd be having a completely different different discussion as far as their hopes for 2024. So it really is one of those situations where you're kind of holding your breath every time. Guy goes out there, pitches well. How's he feel the next day? I mean, that was the issue with Grayson Rodriguez. Grayson pitched well against the Yankees. You and I talked about it the next day. He kind of was grinding through. It wasn't his best command, but his velo was normal. He pitched effectively. He gave you results that you liked. But then the next day he woke up and the shoulder was a little more, guys are always sore the day after a start. I mean, that there's normal soreness, but that was a little above the normal range. So, you shut them down for a couple weeks and you hope that it's just inflammation. And sometimes it just is. Sometimes a guy just misses a couple weeks and gets back out there and, maybe alters his strength training a little bit, gets a little extra treatment between starts and he's good to go. Sometimes it's not that simple. And sometimes we know it's more complicated. So as exciting as it is to get Bradish back and to have Bradish look like Bradish, how's that going to continue to work? And in John Means' case, look, John Means pitched well last September, right? I mean, he had that Saturday night start in Cleveland. What was that? I think it was the next to last weekend of the regular season. He looked like John Means. And we were all saying at that point, wow, they got a number 3 starter to go with Bradish and Grayson Rodriguez in the postseason. And well, we saw how that worked a couple weeks later when his elbow started bothering him again and they shut him down. So it wasn't a new injury, but it's the complications of Tommy John surgery from a long-term standpoint that, some guys come back in 12 months and they're fine and you don't think twice. And sometimes it's, a little more complicated. So as it stands with the pitching, I mean, you really like overall where they are right now, other than Grayson Rodriguez, because Bradish and Means are back. But, ask me in a week how their pitching's doing. Ask me in a month how their pitching's doing. And I mean, it's a different conversation. And I'm not saying that to be doom and gloom for the Orioles. It's the same exact case for everyone. I mean, right now, the Yankees, who are right there with the Orioles, the big discussion is, where's Garrett Cole in this? Where's Garrett Cole? Where is he in his throwing progression? When's he going to pitch? Is he going to be back in June? Is he going to be back by the All-Star break? Don't know. In the same way we didn't know about Bradish until finally he took the hill and, hey, one start in, it looked like Kyle Bradish. Hopefully it looks the same way this week, and hopefully he's still feeling good after the start. And I don't know, maybe if he pitches for 2 or 3 months, we'll stop thinking about that. It's not a narrative, it's reality. But, it very much is I think every general manager, every field manager, every pitching coach in baseball, I think there's a collective holding their breath, especially for your top guys, that guys are just going to feel right because the way that these guys throw today with full max effort and throwing it as hard as they can and spinning the ball and the torque they put on their elbow and their shoulder and, the twist that they have on their wrist, trying to get balls to just break the way that they do on sliders and sweepers and curveballs and all of that, cutters. I mean, it's just the human arm wasn't meant for that. Jim Palmer might have said that 40 years ago, and it just becomes more and more extreme every year. I mean, guys are just doing absurd things with the baseball, but there's a cost. There's no such thing as a free lunch when it comes to what some of these guys are doing mechanically to get the spin, to get the velocity that they're getting. And unfortunately, some guys hold up, but many more break down at some point in time. And, if you're the Orioles, it's trending, it was trending up, with Bradish and Means. And then, you take a step back with Grayson Rodriguez, but, I think you called it whack-a-mole, right? I mean, that's kind of what it just feels like for any team now, trying to navigate 162 with your pitching staff.
Well, the interesting thing for me with Elias, with Kimbrel, it's going to be, an every night issue because this team's going to have leads in the 7th, 8th, and 9th inning. It's going to have high leverage, going to have close games. Played a lot of close games last year. I like the 11-0 games, and they screw up the shutout late. But and Bauman, even given these low leverage situations, guys come in, they give up a run, and then you don't feel as confident saying, well, we'll bring him in over the weekend. But I would think that between Elias and Hyde and the way they've played this, and they now at least know what they have, that on nights when we know Kimbrel's not available, try to set up Cano or try to figure out what that other option's going to be. And that's hard to do, but it's easier when you only play 2 nights this week. So the Nationals on Tuesday and Wednesday. Orioles go down there. It'll be Burns. It'll also be Bradish. We hope to see Means on the weekend. Luke and I will be at Fadley's on Friday from 2 until 5. I have my Pac-Man scratch offs. I have to hold them up. My Pac-Man scratch offs are cool. We'll be giving these away on Friday from the Maryland Lottery. Our friends at Jiffy Lube Multi-Care, as well as Liberty Pure Solutions, keeping my water clean. Also, our friends at Royal Farms and Cole Roofing, filling up my mug here so that I'm a chipper all week. It is our 25th anniversary. The video has been released. No one listens, everyone hears. Big appreciation to the many of you who have seen parts of it, all of it. I'm releasing parts of it out on social media as well, but it is all available. It's 36 minutes long. The Orioles don't even play on Monday and Thursday this week, so you get a chance to go check that out. We also have Preakness coverage next week. We have the election going on this week as well, so tons and tons of things out there. Luke and I are going to talk some football as well before the week is over. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570. Towson, Baltimore, celebrating 25 years of madness around here. All of it brought to you by our friends at Curio Wellness and Far and Dotter. Back for more on Baltimore Positive and WNST right after this.